All right. Hello and good morning, Takyrica Kokoszka. How is it going? How are you today?
Hi, Kimmy. I'm doing wonderful. Good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning to you.
Yes. Um, I am joined by the wonderful Takyrica, whom um I connected to through Fair, first of all, but I also just want to share that the reason we're having this live stream together is because you put out a documentary by Eli Steele about 2 years ago in 2021 about Oak Park, Chicago, and the sort of push to, how would you describe it in your words? The push to sort of force a certain ideology upon an already integrated and very diverse community.
Yeah, it seemed like I don't know, maybe an over aggressive approach to dealing with, racism and discrimination in the area that
Hmm.
I don't know, seemed unnecessary and the motives were,
Yeah,
not where it didn't seem sincere and genuine.
right. So that was published, or at least it was online through Fox News
Yeah.
in 2021, June of 2021, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And that was around the time, I think, it was the heat of the CRT debate because we had BLM.
Growing.
It was like, for some reason, it took like a year for it to really kick off. And 2020 had just, the COVID thing was winding up a little bit. LA was still very strict where I'm at. What was the vibe like in Chicago? You're based in Chicago, right?
Yep. Yep. So I would say the vibe here was at the time of the actual interview, you could tell people were a little unsettled. Some people were, happy and, it was this much needed push for change and reform here. And for some people, it seemed like unnecessarily aggressive, I guess.
Mm,
And it was still a little bit like kind of on a little quieter.
yeah.
And there weren't people making a big stink about it either way.
Hmm.
But, I would say I feel like the time that article came out was, like, what really sent the, kind of anti-CRT, wave, like, to its height.
Yes.
Yeah, it
Okay.
really seemed like a catalyst.
Yeah. Okay. And what is your story? Like, what brought you to make that documentary? What is your, what how did this come about?
Yeah, it came about because, we were on my husband and I were on a parent university from through the school, and it was basically like a diversity training.
And
And,
just quick pause for
yep,
anyone watching who's not familiar. Takarika is, you are a teacher along with your husband, right?
mhm, mhm.
And so they're both educational professionals. We're seeing the sort of back end of things that were being taught in school. So yeah, just wanted to let the people know.
Mhm.
Proceed.
Good point. Yeah, so this was like, as a parent, this was through the school district our kids go to. They had these multiple, I think maybe like 3 or 4, trainings, and it was clear from the beginning that there was, like, this sort of agenda, and,
Mm-hmm.
even though they weren't calling it that, it was CRT based,
Mm-hmm.
which in general, I actually wouldn't describe myself as anti-CRT.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a valid, important theory along with all kinds of other theories. It's
Mm-hmm.
just that my kind of pushback is around what we do with it and the people that we demonize and like
Yeah.
what we're trying to accomplish from it. That's really
Mm,
where my pushback comes from. So on these
yeah.
parent universities, they had all kinds of stuff about essentially how racist white people are, and it, it like, I mean, I guess I get it. I don't know. It just seemed like so much more aggressive for, especially for the community that we're in. We're in a very diverse community, and not to say that, everything is great, because, of course it's not perfect here, but I would say that if you want to make change and you want to kind of get people on board with whatever your ideology is,
Hmm.
you like, that's not, I don't know why you would want to go in that direction per se,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you want people to get on board with you, with your ideas.
Yeah.
And they were like getting ready to introduce a new curriculum, which, this was, believe it or not, 2 years was a very long time ago, and a lot of things have happened since then.
Oh
But
yeah.
I believe it was like a, kind of like a social emotional learning session for the kids, or curriculum for the kids at school. And they
Hmm.
were like training people for it. And so
Yeah.
these parent universities were, to kind of get, inform parents about, like the training that the teachers were getting.
Hmm.
And so it was, the actual curriculum was, to me, full of agenda ideas,
Mm.
around race and, oppressors and oppression, and LGBTQ, and it was, it was clear that
Hmm.
this was like a aligned with a democratic agenda.
Mm. And
And,
so
yeah,
what in your, and funny enough, I love that you said, you reiterated that you are not anti-CRT, because that was, I think, one of the first things you said to me when we met. We met through fair, we
really,
met at an event. Yeah. And we kind of like were like, hey, we introduced each other, and you said, I really, respected like what you put out. Just for the record, I'm not like anti-CRT, but I think there is something else kind of going on. And so for the people watching, like, what is your understanding of CRT? Is there something that a lot of people are missing about, say, CRT versus like critical social justice?
I honestly think now there's so many different variations and ideas about what CRT means.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess critical race theory really leans on this like kind of idea of society being set up in basically two categories
Mm-hmm.
of oppressors and the oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think society is tricky and complicated, and maybe there is some truth to that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's a theory, and I mean, I think we should just stick to things that are not theories when we're teaching kids.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's
Okay.
kind of
Okay.
stay focused
Right.
here, and especially in, like in our area where it is very diverse, and the kids, they don't really care.
Yeah.
They're not, they're playing with whoever they wanna play with because they have common interests or whatever. It's not really
Mm-hmm.
based on skin color for them.
Yeah.
So, it's
And
like,
for that documentary, if anyone hasn't seen it, I had the chance to see it. I didn't see it in 2021, but I saw it recently. I wish I did see it in 2021. It really is a great mini documentary, featuring Takyrica and her husband. But Oak Park, um, is that what it's called? Oak Park?
mhm,
It's very, from what I saw, it was very diverse. The documentary goes into the history of it, and you can sort of tell, that from what I saw in the clips, like children growing up with different races just seemed this normal thing. Do you think like this, this push, particularly in that area in Chicago, do you think this push would have awakened people to start looking at people, people they're already familiar with of a different race, different skin color, as, oh, I didn't know that they were thinking that towards me? Do you think that would have been birthed had that, with that push coming in, or do you think they were just so resilient, like it wouldn't have mattered anyway?
yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the kind of way in which they were trying to awaken people
Mm-hmm.
was effective. It kind of just
Mm,
pushed the same people to their corners.
mm-hmm.
And the people who were kind of not necessarily on board with it, they were quiet.
Mm-hmm.
So the people who were on board with it were really outspoken, and that's really who you got to see in public. And
Oh, I
behind the
see.
scenes, there were, a lot of people that were not at peace with the direction we were going in, because,
Yeah.
of course, this is just the start, and then we build policies based
Mm,
on these ideas.
yeah. And that's interesting for one. But I'm curious about the documentary itself once it came out and it was through Fox News. What was that like? What was the reception to that video for everyone across America, honestly?
It seemed like the people who were on the left were very anti anything to do with Fox News, even
Mm,
though it was Eli Steele
yeah.
who did a wonderful job, and we had a really great conversation with Eli and my husband,
Mm,
and he, like Fox News honestly wasn't really involved in the actual,
like
interview.
production. Yeah.
Yes. So it was on their platform though. So everybody was like, why would you go on Fox News? I'm like, I actually didn't go on Fox News. And to me,
Mm,
a news platform is a news platform, and
right.
they're all imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a particular news platform that I feel so confident about that there's nothing nefarious going on. I
Right.
mean, let's just be honest, they all have agendas.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So either people who were, to the left,
Mm-hmm.
they were like, annoyed and angry about it. And people were really angry about it.
Yeah.
There was a lot of hate. And then
A
there was
lot.
a lot of love. A lot of people, lots
Mm,
and lots of people reached out. And also people locally who,
mm-hmm.
probably would have otherwise not said anything to me, did end
Mm,
up saying, like, I see where you're coming from. And it lended itself to opportunities to have conversations with people who maybe I didn't necessarily agree with.
yeah.
Um, because I I don't know who's really in front of this ideology here in Oak Park, but I get the feeling it's not people of color.
Interesting.
And there, I think a lot of people of color are on board with it, but at,
Mm.
at the at the top of these pushes, I don't I don't feel like that's the case.
What makes you feel that way?
Just from the administration, like let's say at the school district, for example, the people doing these trainings, some of them are Black, but
Mm,
there are a lot of them that aren't. And like I feel like
interesting.
people are falling in line because which I completely understand, but if you have people who are willing to acknowledge that racism exists and they're willing to do the work to do something about it, that's far better than a lot of people who are like, everything's fine. We're even Steven. And
Mhm.
all that stuff happened in the past.
Yeah.
That slavery and discrimination and redlining, that's
Mm.
that's in the past.
Right, right, right. Okay, so let's talk about that for a little bit. So, I, I don't
Yeah,
even know how
let's
to
go
get
next
into
week.
this because, well, a little. If anyone is new here, I spoke out about CRT in 2021, April of 2021, on YouTube. I put out a YouTube video titled "This is why I hate CRT," and I also followed it up with a story of my personal journey out of kind of being consumed with a woke mindset, like what I would call like the cult of wokeness, just following blindly with a certain set of rules, not putting, how do I say this, following blindly with a certain set of rules, feeling hopeless, feeling like there I am in a system where there is no redemption, there is no lifting off this white supremacist like pressure. um I kind of came out of that. And it was, like you said, similar to your experience, there was a lot of hate and there was a lot of there was, I think, way more love, especially like people who are silent, like people who, even in my circle, who I actually was, I was convinced there was no way this person would agree with what I'm saying. And behind the scenes, they would be like, I actually agree with you. You know, people running programs, kind of like, you know, social programs, who you would think there's no way they would actually admit that they have a question about this thing. A lot of people in private. So it was it took a toll on me. It was a big reaction that I was not expecting in both ways. So in any case, I just wanted to double back to the question. Before I get to that, I want to say what happened for you in the 2 years. So from June of 2021 to June of to now, not June, but like to now, 2023. Before we get into the question about you know, canceling the reality of racism altogether, what happened in those 2 years, and what have you noticed with the discussion and the debate around social justice and CRT?
I would say the debate is basically less of a debate now and more of like everybody's in their corners.
Mm,
So you have, to me, it's more of a divide now.
yeah.
And more, you know, rather than, I would say, liberals are still stand where they stand, probably even more strongly, and
Right.
conservatives are even more strongly in their corner, you know, against, and in a lot of ways actually denying a lot of the realities. So now
Mm,
everything, anything around diversity or racism is pretty much like foolish and woke.
mm,
If you have anything to say about that, uh, it's like
right.
there's hate, there's
So
disagreement
right.
immediately. Less conversation and more like, I've decided that this is where I
Mm,
stand and I can't even hear anybody else.
I I mean, I hear you. The 2 years since I put out the first couple videos, I did about like maybe 5 or 6 videos that were very strong in my like outspokenness and explicit, like, you know, I really can't stand whatever this thing is. I made a video on anti-racism, specifically speaking to like Robin DiAngelo, Ibram Kendi's version of that. I made a video, so I hit CRT wokeness and a couple of other videos, mostly based on my Christian faith and what I have noticed from South Africa and Rwanda, kind of importing it into this landscape. One thing that I definitely noticed was the inability to hear what I was really trying to say from, I would say, more left-leaning people, and a lot of construing it with this idea that I am, you know, aligning with white supremacy. I have this sort of, what do you call it, like I have inherited a version of Stockholm syndrome, or like I'm you know, I don't even know the terms anymore. I would be able to say this like a year ago, but it's been such a long time. But anyway, you know, there's this assumption of like, oh, she just doesn't know what she's saying, and she's just blindly repeating lines from like James Lindsay, and there's no like critical race theory is only taught in law school. Like, what are you talking about?
Lots
So
of
I
that.
noticed that there was this thing where critical race theory, you don't know what you're talking about, right? But also, this thing you're talking about doesn't exist. There is no issue in social justice. Like, it was this weird circular thing for almost all of those 2 years where people just weren't saying, yes, there's something that I noticed. Maybe critical race theory isn't the right word, but there is an imbalance with the injustice. Regardless, I kept talking. Like, I kept saying, like, this is what I believe, this is what I believe, this is what I believe. Now, I do think a lot of people, in my opinion, like from where I'm standing, a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm not really with that cancel culture stuff anymore. A lot of people are like, um, they understand that imbalance of like calling all white people evil or oppressors. there's a little bit of shame, a little bit of like, oh, I'm not going to be as extreme. However, I also see, like, maybe because of the things that I've been saying, and this is, you've touched on this, we're kind of going to get into this right now. There's this sense of like, if you do talk about diversity in a favorable light or in a helpful light, then you're just woke again. Like, there's no nuance anymore. Even though the whole time I have been saying a better approach to diversity from those first videos, a better approach to diversity is just giving everyone the opportunity to just approach the table. So just equal opportunity rather than equal outcomes. Like, if someone is feeling like they want to get into a field, get into that field without being weakened by certain ideologies that make you fragile, make you feel like you're being microaggressed against every second. Like, for me, I still think diversity is important. I just think there is a better way into it, right? So the certain concepts, like even thinking that racism is completely done away with, and that every instance of racism is pretty much a fiction, like it's an act of the imagination. It's like, no, I think racism is real. I lived in South Africa.
Here.
I have experienced like daily racism, overt racism. There's nothing about that conversation that is in denial of it. Definitely don't want people to classify themselves as eternally doomed to being racist or eternally doomed to being suffering at the hands of racists. And so I have struggled to find a space to have this conversation healthily, because social media makes it such that we divert into our corners, like you said.
Lots of corners.
Yeah. And so, there's not really room for middle ground, and a lot of people have found their camps. So I'm curious, I've gotten also a lot of critique for being African. A lot of people have said, you haven't grown up in America, you can't speak to this, you've obviously not experienced racism. That keeps coming up a lot. What is your experience having lived in the US as an American? Like, what has been your experience with racism, and what do you think we need to do to address that topic in general, given your experience?
Yeah. So I would say my experience, I've had an experience with racism. I've had what I feel to be instances of discrimination and being treated differently because of my skin color. And sometimes I see that day to day. And, as much as people want to deny it, it does happen. We have biases. And in fact, we all have biases. And we live in a culture where these biases are so subtle. They're ingrained into the content that we watch and the movies and, in the news. And we've certainly made a lot of changes and made a lot of progress in those areas. But it is a different experience being a Black person and having people noticeably react to you differently from, the person in front of you in line that was not Black. So I would say, even the fact that I grew up on the west side of Chicago, which I did fine, my family did fine, but we were kind of limited because we lived in a Black neighborhood that didn't necessarily have the best schools and wasn't the safest area to live in, because Chicago is very segregated. And I think a lot of people who don't live here don't realize that. But we very much so have, Black and white neighborhoods and other things too. There's a Polish neighborhood and a Chinese neighborhood, and there are other neighborhoods, but you're limited, especially, as far as being able to afford your house. You're limited, and I think that does play a role. And your education, your experience with the education system, it could be the difference between where you go to college and maybe even not going to college.
Mm-hmm.
So education is super important, and we just don't pour into all the kids like we do equally over the city of Chicago.
Mm.
So I think that, and oh my goodness, don't get me started about the Chicago public school system,
Mm.
because I think we're failing kids left and right. And we
Yeah.
went from, which is basically what I feel like we do in society, is go from one extreme to the other.
Mm.
We go from really demonizing and making life hard for kids, especially kids who are troubled, which a lot of times means that they're not fitting well into this box that we're trying to make them fit into, and we don't have the resources to really address it. So
Mm-hmm.
we went from being extreme with that and graduation rates being awful to, now pretty much everybody graduates.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, we lose both ways. And all races of people lose in that way. But especially any type of disparity like that is going to affect Black people
Mm.
even harder.
Yeah.
And, I think we're better off admitting the truth and the
Mm.
reality, as opposed to trying to deny it and just say that everybody who notices this, or who believes this is just crazy and woke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Like,
because there is that and again, I don't even know how to put it into words, but I've been in LA for 10 years. So I've been in the US for 10 years. And there's a lot that I haven't been to Chicago. I haven't been, to different places. I haven't been to Alabama. Haven't been
you must
to.
visit.
I will. I
Okay.
will. I've heard great things, and
Yes,
everyone from
please
there who
come.
moves here is so friendly and so like down to earth. Had a really great teacher in college from Chicago, um, but I wanted to say like how do people end up in the, to me it's always been obvious, right? Like the US has had a history of slavery. There has been segregation. I never came here under the assumption that like everything was okay, although it was better than I had imagined. I actually came very fearful. Like, I'll be honest with you, like even in the beginning, the idea of like going to Alabama, like Birmingham, Alabama, I was like, oh, I don't know about that. I have
The
since like
South.
talked to people, like I'm not like terrified of it, but I never really had that assumption that like, oh, you can't talk about the US as if there was a history of racism. It's like, no, I can disagree with the social justice ideology right now. I can disagree with the way that we're villainizing groups of people. And it's still also possible to understand like, and the US was racist. I actually had a comment, like I think yesterday or 2 days ago, on a video I recently put out on DEI not working. And the person was like just disappointed that I said that the US has had a segregated past, and was like, you're slipping away. And so what would you advise for people who have noticed this, say who have noticed that DEI, for example, as it stands, is not working, who have noticed that BLM brought in a lot of forceful pledges that people had to agree with, and they have this bad distaste, and it's hard to talk about racism, it's hard to talk about, you know it's hard to talk about US's past, hard to talk about slavery, and so they'd rather just like block everything out and just avoid Black people altogether. Like, what would you say to that type of person? I know that's not a lot of my audience. A lot of people here are able to think like nuanced, but if to that particular audience, like what would you say?
I would say you're just as delusional as the people who you're against on the other side. That while you're fighting against an extreme, you are in turn
Mm.
creating an extreme. And that
Mm.
maybe you should stop to listen to people's experiences,
Mm.
and maybe try to avoid a lot of the propaganda that we take in,
Mm.
because this is not an attempt to demonize any particular person. There, for the most part, aren't necessarily specific people still here right now, today, alive, who created this system in which we live in right now. So this is not to blame any one particular person, but I would say, try to be open-minded to actually listening to people's experiences and not just rejecting it all because one, is not your experience, or two, you don't see the world like that. Because when you don't have this skin, you have a different worldview because you literally have a different experience in the world. And I would say that honestly for everybody. And don't be so against hearing something that maybe might make you uncomfortable. Maybe there is something to learn for everybody. And in general, across the board, we should do better with listening to people and not just, assuming we know what their intentions are.
Yeah. Okay. That is a really great word. Thank you so much. I want to also ask you, what would you say to the people who maybe mischaracterize you? So now this was addressing the one extreme. What would you say to the other extreme that's more left leaning, that has, I don't know what to describe it as, but has this view of people who criticize or push back against like CRT or critical social justice? How would you have a conversation with them, and what would your advice to them be?
I would say for people who are, Black and brown, don't let people take your power because there is power in how you are categorized. And so don't let people take that ability for you to stand strong in who you are as a human being just because you look a certain way. And for the people who are not Black or brown, I would say still listen. Don't just listen to, one side that, shares maybe a negative experience with their skin color. Listen to everybody. Don't just listen to people because they have a certain ideology, because there's a lot to be gleaned from everybody, even people you don't agree with. And I think we could probably better address the needs and really continue to push for Black people to have our power back in our identity and who we are and what we stand for.
Yeah.
Because it's all over the place and we're kind of not in control of it. And it affects the way we all see ourselves. So let's love and empower ourselves and empower everyone, and not, make too many assumptions about where you think people stand.
Yeah. That's good. That's good too. Oh, preaching. You are preaching today. So I also want to talk about, I briefly mentioned Daryl Davis. What you're saying is in alignment with a lot of the things Daryl Davis says, in terms of listening to people's experiences on both sides, like on both ends of both extremes. He says, or in his experience, Daryl Davis, is an African-American man who has deprogrammed, I can't say it, I know this live stream might get flagged, but triple letter K members, and taken them out of that not only group but mindset just by listening to them and validating, even though he doesn't agree, but just being like, I hear you, I hear where you're coming from, I'm sitting down, I'm giving you the time, I'm giving you the ear. I think people underestimate how powerful that is. And I have been since talking about these topics from 2021, I have been in spaces where mostly conservative folks, right, tend to get very fearful, get very angry, and say, we have to stand up against this. We have to call out everyone who does this. We have to hold them accountable. And my advice has pretty much for the most part always been, there is always power in the more subtle forms of communication. So even in forgiveness, it sounds to the left, that sounds like that's nothing. Like you're just saying forget about the past, which is not the same word.
No,
it's not the same word at all. So the same applies in terms of listening, just be, have love, have compassion, care about that person as a human being and not as an icon representing a certain ideology. When you make TikToks making fun of woke people, making fun of people who are deep in this mindset, you're literally reinforcing that. They see that and they're like, I'm gonna go harder next time because I'm being persecuted for my beliefs. There is a lot of power to just being like, hey, let's sit down and have a conversation about this. And I want to actually listen to what you're saying. I don't want to have a conversation just to shout at you. I actually want to listen to what you're saying, give space to what you're saying. And then you can maybe say, hey, we can agree to disagree, but these are my beliefs and this is what I have experienced. So yeah, I just wanted to say everything you've advised for both sides reminds me a lot of Daryl Davis, reminds me a lot of, and not just, just his idea, but his impact. The effectiveness of that approach has led to the most extreme people coming out of that extremity, right? So it is powerful. So
Yeah,
yes.
and I just want to say that I don't think that, this is like a one size fit all and there's one solution and that's the only way you can tackle
Yes.
things. This is a very dynamic problem that is been a problem for many, many years, and there's no one
Yeah.
direction we can go to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of many possibilities. We can probably talk for hours on, what could help and what could, be helpful.
Yeah.
So this is one of many approaches. And so, yes, listening to people, it's actually very effective.
Mm-hmm.
And Daryl Davis, he didn't name it this at the time when he was doing it, but when he was um, literally sitting down listening to the people with the white hats,
Yes.
he yeah, I mean, of course he didn't agree with them. They
Mm.
hated people who looked like him.
Mm-hmm.
And he probably had given them space that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise had, because he was a little patient and probably stood firm in who he was as a
Mm-hmm.
person. I know I've done nothing to be hated. I know I don't deserve to be hated. I know that I haven't earned this. So this is not mine. This is yours. This is
That's
how
your
you
problem.
feel.
Yeah.
That's your problem. So don't, like, you can't take a lot of things personal.
Yeah.
And so, I think even in the workplace, this is a good approach. Don't just assume things about people.
Mm.
And I taught many diversity trainings with the
Mm.
pro-human approach for really understanding how our brains work as human beings,
Yeah.
and not so much as to like culturally why we have ideas that we have, which is also a layer. But really, the first thing is we're all humans. We're all
Mm.
people.
Yeah.
And so, really understanding how we work and how our brains work and how we respond to things and what we think about things, and being honest about that, because I don't think a lot of people are honest about
Mm.
how they feel about a lot of stuff, including
Yeah.
race.
Mm.
Um, and we can't just, because somebody says, for example, this one that gets a lot of people triggered, I don't see color. Okay, well, maybe it's an opportunity to say, tell me more about that, rather than, oh, you racist.
Right.
Or, like maybe even agreeing with that. I don't even know what you mean by that.
Right. Yeah.
So, just don't make so many assumptions right off the bat. Now, eventually, once you have a little more information, maybe you can, but give people a chance, and maybe there's a learning opportunity with this interaction. And I
Yeah.
think enough interactions like that, where it's like, okay, I'm not coming after you, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to share maybe something that you hadn't thought about, or an
Right.
experience that maybe that you didn't know was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And we are all affected. I just want to say this, and I'll let you
Totally. Go for it.
do your question. We are really impacted by the content that we take in. And if you are taking in
Yeah.
lopsided views, you will have lopsided views. And none of us are naturally that lopsided. But the
Wow.
more you take that stuff in, the more you're going to go to a corner. And that's our
Mm.
problem. We need to start coming out of the corners.
That is
But
really well said. You said, like, you put that very, like, I couldn't put it any more perfectly. You should start a YouTube channel, Takyrica. What? I'm like, wait, I need to like write this down, like for real. Like this is so good.
thanks.
Um, that is so good. We actually like in our day to day, right? I have um I'd like to say I'm decent acquaintances with my next door neighbor, but he's left leaning, like he's a socialist, and he is and I don't I'm more favor like a capitalist structure, which is a whole topic for another day. But we're we're very friendly and very respectful, and have talked about different ideas. Um, and I just think there is that reality when you go to people, you will realize like we just aren't as lopsided as we see social media to be. We aren't that boxed in. We have so much more variance in individuals that we shouldn't be afraid to explore. We shouldn't be afraid to tap in. Um, and so I wanted to ask you. You mentioned you are diverse. You did diversity training, which for a lot of people that's like a curse word.
It is.
For
It's
some
like,
reason, it's
ooh,
become like. I mean, I do understand the reason. 2020 really flipped things. That was a definite like um, weird out of nowhere. The Metro had signs, "We stand with George Floyd," and that case hadn't even been resolved yet, but so many things were being decided and being made definite in so many institutions, corporate world, on college campuses. Like there's now a huge industry that blew up in the last 2 years, right? So I understand why people are a little bit jaded, but in your diversity training experience, you mentioned taking the pro-human approach. What is pro-humanism to you, and how does it differ from anti-racism?
yeah, good question. I I mean, looking back, now that I've had a little bit of space away from it, I would probably describe pro-human is as seeing people more on an individual basis, rather than group. And so seeing people, as human beings first, and kind of focusing on, commonalities and stuff like that, and then, venturing out to maybe things that, other feelings, and making space for people to stand wherever they stand.
Mm,
And I would say anti-racism is essentially, it like groups us all together, which I think does have some benefits at times.
mm,
Um, to me, for if you want us to, kind of blend a little bit better, I feel like anti-racism kind of makes us um, choose, like a category, if you will.
mm, mm.
It like by default, it kind of forces us to do that. But which, at times has some value and some worth.
Mm,
But, for example, in the workplace, we have to work with all kinds of different people.
mhm,
And so, just really pro-human allows us to see people um, on an individual basis, and
mm.
get to know them personally, rather than, just assume that they have certain ideas because they're of a certain group.
Yeah. And do you um big question, kind of a general question. Do you
Okay.
think, looking back on diversity training, um this might be a heated question, but do you think this is something that is needed in the corporate workspace? Or is it something we should be having in our own time outside of work?
Good question. I definitely think, as far as like, political views and religious views, and, maybe even racial stuff,
Mm,
that's probably something better suited outside of work. Because let's just be
mhm,
honest, uh, you're not going to really let your hair down and talk about all the things you really feel and think at work.
Right. Yeah.
You have a job and you want to keep it, and so you're not going to be completely transparent.
Mm.
And I don't think the workspace is a valuable kind of lens to work through some of those issues, those racial differences and
Yeah.
religious differences and those kind of big differences. For me, I would say the first approach is maybe understanding our biases, which are like our shortcuts in thinking, stereotyping, flattening of people. So, we make assumptions about people based off of, the limited information. I would say that's probably better suited to address in the workplace, because that for sure is a barrier,
Mm.
and it makes work challenging for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But and specifically, it can make work challenging for Black people too, because
Mm.
we all have biases,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a normal human thing. So just kind of trying to normalize that our brains work a certain way, and just kind of getting familiar with that, and understanding why, and then the work that you put into that. Nobody can force you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
If you have biases towards certain groups of people, no type of training can force you to deal with it.
Mm. Mm.
Maybe at work you provide the tools to be able to get down to that level internally,
Yeah.
but the actual work, that's I don't know that work is a helpful place to address those types of issues.
Right. Right. Do you think we should actually, before I get into that, I wanted to share briefly the place I work at. We have this personal, I found it to be a very interesting sort of diversity training. I don't even think they called it that. It was something else, but it did have to do with understanding people's differences, and just being friendly around that, being courteous, not, making fun of, like, if someone came to work, for example, wearing like a turban, like, you don't want to isolate that person for that reason, right? So there is this place of wanting to understand people's differences and be respectful in the workplace around them, and not bringing, maybe at home you do say certain things that you don't realize are aggressive. So I think there's a place to just, hey, everyone, let's come together, let's agree that we want to respect everyone's differences, and then you send people out to work. You know what I mean? So I definitely agree with that. I just wanted to share
And
the
I
sort
just
of.
want to,
Go ahead.
sorry,
Go
not to
ahead.
cut you off, but I just want to say that's the spirit of which the diversity trainings that I was facilitating, that was the spirit of which we came from.
Mm.
Because that's real. That's
Yeah.
100% real. And it's sometimes across the board for various different things. And we do have differences. And there people do have perceptions about, let's say people who wear braids, or
Mm-hmm.
people who have natural hair, or people who have
Mm-hmm.
perms, or
Right.
whatever, so
Yeah.
like that's a real thing. And like, let's normalize that, hey, we do have these thoughts. And it's like what to do when you're at work with those ideas, just being
Mm-hmm.
mindful that not everybody has the same sense of humor you have, and not
Yes.
everyone thinks that what you think is funny.
Right. 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 Right.
Like what your jokes are funny or appropriate for the workplace. So just kind
Yes.
of bringing that to light, I think, really helps to improve the workplace culture. And one of the things that I found an interesting reaction, and I hope it spoke to the effectiveness of the training.
Mm.
But at the start of this training, usually 2 hours, you could tell, we did it over Zoom usually, but sometimes it was in person. You could tell people were like, I'm not buying any of this. Like,
It was
it's
like,
it's weak and lame.
yeah.
Yes, it was exactly like.
Yeah.
And by the end, people were talking. People, like, I really feel by the end, people felt seen and heard, and there was no demonizing of anyone.
Come on.
And I think even specifically for the people of color, I think they felt like, okay, we're really getting down to the specific nature of where some of these ideas and this like behavior that you deal with in the workplace comes from. And for the people who were maybe, had that bad behavior, they were starting to understand like, oh, okay, maybe I am kind of falling into some of these shortcuts and thinking that aren't helpful.
Yeah.
So, I have seen it and gotten very, very good feedback from everybody across races
Yeah.
on that approach to
Yeah.
not necessarily grouping us by race, but focusing on some of those immutable characteristics
Yeah.
that I
Exactly.
felt like had more effectiveness as far as like, what you were intending people to get out of it and what they took home. People were able to take it home too and apply
Right.
it
Right.
to their spouses, their kids, their
Yes.
friends, their neighbors.
Yes.
Just a lot of success stories like that where, people found the tools valuable.
That's good. I love that, and I love hearing that. It reminds me of I've only been a part of four, I think distinctly that I remember, four types of diversity trainings since 2020. Yes, since 2020. First one was horrible. It was literally, I don't know if I will ever make a video about this, but it was with my church a few weeks now. Again, given the context, I can understand the tension, the trauma. It was just like a few weeks after George Floyd. But it was so like full of anger, full of generalizations, full of broad statements about certain groups. And it left me kind of just like completely confused as to where, as Christians, because it was with a church, like why do we even believe what we believe if we've just like switched up overnight? But then the other three, and I think this was in alignment with what you were sharing, the other three, in the beginning, because I was jaded from that one experience, I was very much so like, I'd have no hope for this. This is going to end in disaster. But because they started off, I think one of them was actually influenced by Daryl Davis, and this was more of it was a sort of left-leaning community, but the person was still nonetheless like influenced by Daryl Davis's teachings and wanted people to view all people as worthy of respect, but also respect and understand the different characteristics we might have, immutable characteristics. But it came from a place of we're all together. It's not this us versus them thing. The other one was with Equity Lens Consultants here in LA. I had a live stream actually with Maisha Reynolds, who I would love to introduce you to. She talks a lot about equity.
Let's do it.
But she had a symposium that was really good. And again, that word equity, I think I actually made
very triggering for a lot of people.
It is very triggering. It has been very triggering for me, to be honest. And I even made a video about it. That was like, this is why I can't stand the word equity. That was the title of the video. But when she explained it, I was very like, my mind was just like, I get what you're saying. And she also was coming from a kingdom perspective. So she was a Christian, and she wasn't defining equity according to the world. It was according to what the word says about treating everyone equitably, equally, and just redeeming that word, right? And so that was awesome. And lastly, at my workplace, they had I even wonder if like this was a workplace that had your diversity training in it. Because I'm like, as you're describing it, it sounds very similar. Because it didn't come off, there was no like stench of wokeness with it. It literally was, it had both the other side of like, if you, I don't know how to put this into words, but it was basically saying, if you happen to be say a person of color, like if I notice that I have not been promoted, and I take into the fact that I'm a Black woman and everyone else say maybe is Asian, white, like every other ethnicity, like don't internalize that as a grievance, because it could still be your performance that is just being evaluated alone. Like don't look at that through the lens of I have been selected out or I have been marginalized because of that. They tackled both like, yes, these biases are real, But on the flip side, they also said, don't also make yourself think that because everyone is trying to evaluate each other on performance, so don't let that mindset grieve you. I was like, that's interesting. Like, they actually put that in there in a balanced way, in both ways. So
That is
I'm very
interesting.
curious as to who did that diversity training. But
yeah, me too.
yeah,
Let me know if you find out.
I will investigate that. But anyway, is there anything on your mind over what we just talked about that you wanna bring up? I had a question, but it's kind of gone right now. So
Okay, all right. Well,
yeah.
let's try to get that question back.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I will say, you mentioned something earlier about, like, it's been a couple years, and
Yes.
how you asked about how things have changed. And I would say that things have changed for me in a very, very meaningful and powerful way.
Mm.
And whereas before, I didn't, the older I got, the less on the left I was. Like, I found myself, kind of gradually pulling towards the right in some ways.
Mm.
Um, and, maybe I had some moderate political views.
Mm-hmm.
And that has changed
Mm.
drastically.
Mm-hmm.
That has changed
Okay.
drastically.
How so?
I don't have any political, um, I don't identify with any political categories anymore.
Mm.
I've taken that identity, and it's in Christ now. It's in Christ.
Come
Yeah.
on.
So I don't have no sides no more. I
Come
don't even
on.
have a middle spot. I'm not in the middle. I'm 1000% on the side of Christ. And so that's
Takyrica.
where my identity is.
That is good.
And what a
Honestly,
relief.
what a
What a
relief.
relief. It's a weight off my shoulders.
Amen.
Life is less of a burden now
Mm.
because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I 100% I concur. I feel the same way. I think I also I'm just looking at the comments really quickly. But yeah, if you have anything to share, please let me know. But I have the same sort of view. There was a point where in the middle of 2020, I was very like taken aback by. It wasn't 2020. I think it was early 2020, not like in the heat of things, but I was taken aback by the lack of action that is gonna sound so random. That they took to arrest Ghislaine Maxwell. That was really something that made me sort of enter a lot of conservative talking point spaces, because there was this documentary that came out on Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and I was just very distraught by the fact that nothing was being done. And so I had this very like rebellious anarchist, like deep state is taking control of things, and that kind of pushed me into a lot of conservative circles. But it was very unhealthy. Like, it became its own cult in a way. And in fact, there was also the cult of like QAnon, but I never got into. I was always like, there's something off about this. There's something
Thank
like,
goodness your spirit felt that.
yeah, there was this. And a matter of fact, I don't know if you saw the documentary, but there was like this kid who was running it with his dad, and they were into like pornography. And so it was really, really dark. Like, the root of it, the heart of it was really dark. Anyway, I say all that to say, like, I agree with you, because there is just a certain binding of identity where if you choose one or the other, there's so much confusion that comes, and so much like, now you have a lens to which to blame your opposites. You blame those who are not with you, and it brings back that us and them mentality. But also, pulling back to the Christ thing, I think that's definitely going to inform a lot of the decisions I make voting wise. But it doesn't have to be like bound to one group or another, because I'm seeing some things too in the Conservative Party. I'm like, I don't know if this is of God at all. But anyway, I hear you.
Same.
And I agree with you. And I just think it's just better to just pull back and say, hey, my identity is in Christ. And it's funny because I think it's even worse than having one side or another, because now people don't know how to categorize you, and it's very confusing.
It's
and people
very
don't like
confusing,
that.
isn't it?
It sure is.
Yep.
It sure is.
I don't know how it's possible, but I'm neither pro-choice nor pro-life.
Oh,
Like, I'm pro whatever's in the Bible.
well,
I'm sticking to that.
that's a good way to put it. That is a deep topic to carry.
Mhm.
That is an interesting
Listen.
topic. I mean, I will say, like, I'm not at that stage yet. I think I definitely, personally, I'm still very, like, I would call it pro-life, but I hear what you're saying. You're pro in the what's in the Bible, which is anyway.
Which is a whole nother,
That is a
conversation. But the point
whole
is,
nother conversation. The
I
labels,
I limit myself on the labels that I use to describe my beliefs.
right? Yeah, because
Because I pigeonhole my own self too.
right.
So,
Yeah,
and I don't want to see myself through basically a man-made lens of either or,
right.
because nothing is usually black or white. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
sometimes,
Yeah.
but as
I
far as a
mean,
lot of these complicated, topics and spaces,
yeah.
there's usually a lot of nuance for everyone.
Mm-hmm. And I've noticed how discussions break down when you're talking, say, for example, when you ascribe to these labels, how easy arguments become, and they end easy because the moment you're like, well, if you're having a debate with a conservative and maybe a liberal, left or right, it's like, I'm pro-life. One person will say, like, I'm pro-life, and the other will be like, okay, so you're pro-life only in the womb, but then when it comes to gun control, so it's just a switching of labels of very big topics. But it's just like, we're just using these sort of catch-all phrases to trump one another, despite the fact that those two phrases encompass a lot that neither party is ready to actually have a healthy discussion about. Anyway,
Absolutely. That's a really good point, because a lot of times you don't get to make it that far.
right. You never make it that far because it's like, it's just going to devolve into arguing and blame shifting, name calling, labels being thrown. I think America is actually, can I be honest? I think America is in a really bad state, a really bad way with the binary that has been created in the political field.
Absolutely.
It's even, I think, more so, maybe not more so, but to the extent that people are trying to tackle wokeness, and we can talk about that in a second, but in the extent that people are trying to tackle wokeness, they're still trying to use the political binary lens to talk about it. And because of that, they don't realize how they are turning into the other side. I don't know how to
They're
put.
using the same
It's the
tactics
same
as the other
tactics,
side. Yes,
and
it's
it's
just
like,
different standpoint.
right, it's an illusion of a battle, but you're not actually winning. You're just becoming like the side you're fighting because you're using ineffective tools. But anyway, I just think, for me, being too awake in, like, the conservative side, being woke on the left side, again, I'm using these just in terms of human speak, but I really just mean the same thing. Like, if you think you're engulfed in the system that you cannot be free of, to me, that's wokeness. If you think because of immutable characteristics, immutable traits, you're predestined to a certain doom and gloom, if you look at it through lens of class, through the lens of race, through the lens of gender, if you see those things as predetermining you to a future of oppression, whether that's by the deep state or by systemic racism, then to me, that's like allowing something you can't see, something that's intangible, to dictate your future. And that, to me, comes close to my religion of Christianity, where I'm like, I can't buy into another religion that puts another force over me. That is just in contradiction to what I believe, because I serve one God. You know what I mean?
Well
So
said.
anyway,
Very, very well said.
glory to God. Glory to God for
Glory
the
to God.
revelation.
Hallelujah.
Um, But speaking of which, I just want to talk about the word woke. Um,
Oh boy, here we go.
what comes to mind, and what has been your journey with the word woke?
Um, so in general, it was a word that I kind of used maybe a couple years ago that it seems its meaning has evolved. And now, quite honestly, it feels like more of a slur. Like when people use woke, it's like they're throwing shots. And I I get it in some ways. It's like it's a weapon now. It has been it's officially weaponized.
Mm,
I kind of took it to mean, kind of somebody who is maybe like overly awake and alert
mm,
to, a lot of the injustices, like finding injustices, literally in everything,
mm-hmm.
which I mean, yeah. So anyway, that's what I kind of thought woke was, and I didn't necessarily assign it to any particular race.
Mm-hmm.
Um, from what I had seen, I felt like a lot of people kind of described themselves as woke
Yeah,
at one point, but it was more like woke to the things that are going on around us,
yeah,
and woke to the way the system is set up and how it's designed,
yeah.
and the way that the system was fairly or unfairly designed to
Mm-hmm.
work. It was designed against a group of people. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
can't deny that,
Yeah,
so that is true. So that's kind of what woke meant to me.
yeah.
And now fast forward to May of 2023. And I feel like anything that addresses, like anybody who says anything about any sort of injustice or discrimination or racism or anything or diversity, don't
Mm,
ever say the word equity. It's automatically, oh, you're woke.
that
You don't
word,
even know me.
it's that word. Okay. By the way, I want to thank you, Reinhardt, so much for the $5 um, super chat. Appreciate it. Reinhardt says, well said. Um, yeah, I
Thank you.
100%, yeah, I 100%, I hear you and I agree. I think so okay, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. Have you seen that
Okay,
meme?
okay.
Let me tell you something.
Yes, I
Um,
have. Let's go. All right, let me get
so
let me sit back in my chair so I
yeah,
can prepare myself for this. Let's
right,
go.
right, right. So I same. I understood the word woke to mean the same thing that you described, right? Being hyper aware to injustices, and in fact, I had that like mindset. I can definitely tell you, like, for a good period of about 4 years, I was deeply, deeply woke, to the point that it produced anxiety and depression within me. And I thought the more I can see, the more I'll be able to, stand against it or discern. And I saw that as a powerful thing. However, despite as much as I wanted it to be powerful, it would always come back to a more disempowering position. So like people who were maybe, like they understood that there was injustice, unfairness here and there, but they weren't letting it ruin the day. They were going about their day just being able to do things, but because I was taking in extra doses of it, I was performing at a lower like volume. And so I had this season of life where I was really just struggling. So not only mentally, but your mental affects your physical, what you do, what you're capable of
Absolutely.
doing. So I kind of came out of it through forgiveness, and I thank God for that day where I realized, you know what, maybe it's not the people. Sure, people do things, all people do messed up stuff, we're all broken, but maybe the lens that I am looking out of is not being gracious to understanding where they're coming from. But I also need to forgive where I have been hurt by these instances, and some of them were really racist. Like, I don't want to put people on blast, but some of the things that really broke me down were actually racism, right? Some of them were just like, who knows, it could be racism, it could have been constipation, like some things, people be going through stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And in all, I realized it made a very big difference in my mental health when I started to forgive, when I started to grant grace. I no longer became as bogged down in my day-to-day by looking at life through this lens. And so I think for that version of wokeness, which a lot of my peers struggle with, like a lot of people that are out here, and at least I'll speak for LA, but out here in LA, there's this looking for religion, looking for meaning, looking for identity, and in that turning to these schools of thought to provide that, and instead it's having that inverse effect of bringing people down mentally. Now, when I made a video talking about wokeness, when everyone was now waking up to wokeness, right, in 2020, I was seeing like a lot of people begin to adopt what I saw had been already negative for me. And I was like, that's not good. And I want to speak up about this because I feel like people are too afraid to talk about it. Like people are too afraid to say, I think there's something wrong with this social justice movement. People are too afraid for this, that, and the third. And I was like, let me make this video. Mind you, I had read an article by Africa Brooke called Why I Left the Woke Cult. I'm not 100% sure, but it was a similar title. So I want to give her credit for the cult of wokeness thing, because I saw that a while ago and then it was in my mind and then I made the video, but I didn't intend to like, plagiarize that term. So shout out to her for that original article. But I thought, let me speak out on this and make a video on wokeness. And that video had like 500,000, today it has like 500,000 views, like 500,000. Wow. But I say all that to say, after that, there were people who approached me, and I'm gonna tell you a huge whistleblow a little bit. Maybe some of you already know this, right? There was someone who approached me as like a YouTube advisor because I had made this video on YouTube, and they showed me this page called Google Trends, and you can search words and look for where the most traffic is going to. Okay. So if you look up the word woke, at that time, woke was a very high-reaching word. And so if your YouTube video had the title woke in it, it basically was a guarantee that it was going to be pushed to the algorithm. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So after that, and this was after I put out the video already. So I didn't know about that before I put out the video. But someone did tell me about that. We had a meeting and we talked about that. And they were like, if your YouTube channel is to grow, you need to keep putting the word woke into your YouTube videos, into your YouTube titles. And something in my spirit was just like, but I don't have anything else to say. I don't have anything else to say on this word. So I will only make videos where I feel like there is something to say about that. But for the most part, I can't conjure up things just. And I say all that to say, the way the word woke has devolved now is because people have been using it for money. And I'll tell you that like straight up. Whether that's the Daily Wire, whether that is any other conservative person you see, when it's woke TikTok reactions, guys, most of that stuff is not there because people are finding it to be a virus. It's because people are capitalizing on a trend. And I've said this many times in my YouTube videos now, like there is always the temptation to want to just put this video out just because it's going to get views guaranteed. But now, because people have overused it because of greed, it's hard to actually talk about the real thing, because now it just means anything, because everyone's tried to say anything and put it all under the umbrella of woke for views, for money, for gain. And I don't think that's right. And I think even though I've been silent, I'm grateful for times where I've been silent and sat back and not been as, as hungry to go hard for subs, for likes, for views. I've just been like, as long as it's meaningful to me, it's going out there. But the word woke, in my opinion, has become, and even the issue is, it's not even the title, but the issue that we're trying to address, it's now much harder to address because the people who need to hear it, all they hear now is just conservatives going on and on about this word. And that breaks my heart, because now it just means something completely different, and we can't. The issue is just that much harder to talk about, because now people's emotions have been played with, people's emotions have been messed with, and yeah, it just breaks my heart.
Well said, because we're being programmed. And for anybody out there saying, "Oh, woke is always bad," don't like that's the woke in the way that you've been programmed to understand it. Yes, I probably agree it's always bad. But we have to understand when we're being fooled
Yeah,
and we're being used.
yeah,
Our views are being used to make a monetary gain.
yeah.
And a lot of this stuff now, and people don't realize it because people are saying, maybe a lot of things they agree with. People don't realize, yes, there's an algorithm. Yes, there is. It's very purposeful what videos end up in your news feed. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not because this is what's good for you. This is
Ooh,
because
yeah,
this is the drama that, people will click on. And so I really appreciate you for not taking the bait on, oh, let me just do it because it's trendy, it's popular to get me the views.
mm,
Because a lot of people are doing that,
yeah,
regardless of where you stand politically.
right,
And so that's why you have to be very careful, like I said earlier, about what you consume and how much of it.
yeah.
Because don't be swallowed up by the algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
You are not smarter than the algorithm.
Mm-hmm. By the
So
way, I just quickly want to I actually want to quickly address this comment. So someone just said, "Would you, would you?" It's interesting because the answer is already in the question, because that's not really what we're saying. But the person is asking, "Would you hire someone who is dirty and has bad hygiene, or the clean, well put together person? Your outward image does add aspects that are outside your degrees. Unless we're getting into judging solely on pigment, then yeah, that's racism." Would you have anything to add to that, or to speak to that?
I I guess I kind of, unfortunately the chat is a little behind.
Okay,
So I wish I knew what this was in response to.
no
But
worries.
yeah, like would I hire somebody who's dirty? I wouldn't let I wouldn't necessarily let that be the sole determining factor,
Yeah.
because yeah, I can just and what's my view on dirty? What do I consider dirty
Mm,
versus what another person considers dirty? And absolutely, your appearance does have an effect.
yeah.
I
I
completely agree
mean,
with that. Yeah, 100%. Like, of course,
yeah.
our perception, the way we present ourselves, matters in the way that people perceive us.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not always accurate.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of times we make assumptions about something we get a first glance or notice
Mm-hmm.
that's not accurate.
For example, and by the way, just to also answer that question, like I most companies have like a workplace code of conduct. Basically, like you can't show up to work unhygienic. Like that's not necessarily diversity. Like you have
No.
to come to work, clean nails, clean everything. If necessary, if you're working with food, you have to wear a hairnet and that sort of thing. So that's like a whole different topic, where of course there are certain standards for everyone. You have to show up. Now, I will say, kind of briefly going into the topic of this is why I think there is importance to diversity and having this as a discussion in the workplace, where there is a stigma against, say, natural hair, because there has been an association with that being dirty, which is not like a historical racist association. That being like, oh, that you're not allowed to wear that hair because it's like bad. That just comes from racism and racial stigma, because like, for example, with my hair journey, I used to wear my hair relaxed and long, but it was unhealthy. It was actually very, very bad, because I could only get it treated at the salon months at a time. Now my hair is far more hygienic and healthy, despite the fact that I wear it natural, because I don't have to go to the salon all the time. I can always wash it in my own time. And so the appearance of it is might get judged as, oh, this is unkempt. And I was even thinking about making a video of this, but it is scientifically, in terms of like cleanliness level, it is way more hygienic, it is way more healthy. My scalp is healthy. And so when it comes to erasing that stigma of like natural hair or braided hair, that is, you know, historically, like it might come through like through the grapevine, but people learn these really dumb ideas that, you know, Black people or any individual of a different race other than white, if you wear your hair a type of way, that is just associated with like lack of hygiene, and
certain
that is
ideas.
Yeah, certain
All
ideas,
kinds of
which is
ideas.
just false. And I think there is room to address that and be like, hey, wearing an afro is not, you can't equate that with a lack of hygiene. I remember going through this a lot in high school in South Africa. And some of these are the things I mean when I say that I have experienced racism, and I have like, I don't come to America just saying like, oh, I know nothing of like, you know, living in a multicultural landscape. Like, I have dealt with these issues, I have had these conversations, I have had these reprimands, like I have had this up and down the wazoo. So I do think, you know, I can speak against the dangers of wokeness, but I also can speak to the fact that, you know, racism is still real, and we still need to have a conversation with a level-headed mind.
I completely agree.
And also, you know, someone just said, to answer that question, pardon my presence, says, to answer that question, my brother hired a homeless contractor who fell on tough times. They renovated the basement at a cheaper price, and he had room and board. Appearance doesn't equate to talent. And that's another
I completely agree. Yes,
because
I
the
completely
reason
agree.
someone could be getting a job is to get out of a hard situation. So even upon that interview, you know, there is more to evaluate if someone has fallen on hard times than just being like, well, you know, A, B, C, D, and whatever have you. So yeah, it's a tricky one, but no, we appreciate your comments. These are important things to speak and utter out loud and have conversations for, without the danger of pushback. We're having this live
Getting
stream.
judged.
Yeah, we're having this live stream so that, you know, we can have these conversations with safety, without you fearing of, you know, being exposed or getting fired. Like, these are hard conversations to have. So Takyrica, thank you for being bold enough to have this conversation and be on this thing, because this stuff is, as you've experienced it can be contentious.
It's a lot.
It is a
Yes.
lot.
But thank you so much for, you know,
Absolutely.
inviting me to have this conversation.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, it can be hard sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's a big weight, and it's a big weight to carry throughout the conversation even.
Right. And do you think, speaking to diversity, I think diversity in the workplace, I just want to touch on this a little bit longer. Given, and I just recently actually watched a video on a New York Times piece that stated DEI, the mainstream version of DEI is failing. There's a lot of data coming out that it's actually creating more resentment. It's creating more tension. It's literally just reviving racism in simple terms. What is your opinion on just diversity moving forward? Like, for those companies that have had the old model, or maybe the current model, I should say, what would you like if you were given the opportunity to advise, let's pick a company, Colgate, on their diversity? What would you advise, and how would you handle that? Does that make sense?
It does. That's a really big question. However, I would say probably in general, if I had like my 30-second elevator pitch
Mm-hmm.
to the CEO or whoever, would be to not focus on necessarily groups of people, you know, based on race or skin color,
Mm-hmm.
to maybe, I would say, to address the human aspect of people and the way that we interact with each other, the assumptions we make about each other, the way we see each other and perceive things, maybe where some of those ideas come from. I would say go at it from that angle, from a very pro-human lens. So seeing people as unique individuals and not necessarily assume, like people of, who are Muslim do this, and people who are atheists do this, like not necessarily make so many assumptions about that. And, just really highlighting the importance of diversity and the dangers and making assumptions about people and the natural ability for us to make assumptions about people. And the last thing will be no groups unless people want to organize them, unless the employees want to organize them. So having certain groups for people, who love CrossFit, or people who, are Black, or people who are Christians. Let the employees organize those groups. Don't have them organized because, like mandated because, we're trying to check a box. Avoid any check the box type stuff because people will find that insincere and they won't respond to it in a way that's going to be meaningful. And the other last thing, he'd be off the elevator or she'd be off the elevator by now, but don't compel people to be advocates for certain groups, for any groups. Don't compel people. You can offer it and make it an option, but no, I don't think anybody should be forced to be an advocate for any group.
Yeah. Period. That is well said. That is such a thank you. Like, thank you so much. I am not CEO person, but I'm sure they would appreciate it. I think that is just so well put. I have heard so many stories of people being forced to have to approve, an ideology, especially artists right now, in order to get grants. There's this thing where you have to acknowledge that you believe in this, that you believe in, say, for example, separating people into affinity groups. Like, you will be okay with that. Like you said, I don't think those things should be forced. I don't think those things should be mandated.
Wow.
But there are lots of stories, even people in Fair in the Arts, for example, who have shared their stories about literally being withheld grants, being withheld funding for that. So there is that even degree of toxicity that I think we need to address. And I think it's especially, it's more compelling where you're not saying this idea as a concept as a whole, diversity is terrible. Rather, understand that it is valuable. There is a place for having these discussions, but to the extent of making it so cruel, that will turn people off to the notion of diversity altogether. Anyway,
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Takyrica. There is so many things we could touch on today, but
I'm sure aren't they?
We could have a really long
conversation for another time. Part 2.
For another time. Part 2 coming soon. If you guys have more things you would want us to touch on, you're welcome to leave that in the comments below. The live chat will probably be gone for this, but feel free to leave it on the comment of the live stream once it's up. If you love this, please like this video. Do subscribe for more conversations in this vein. And by the way, Takyrica, you're a believer, right? You're a Christian.
Absolutely.
And you love the Lord. And so we would probably talk more about coming from that perspective and dealing with these issues with our identity hidden in Christ.
I like it.
If you're looking forward to that, hang tight. Takyrica, I highly recommend you start a YouTube channel. Okay. You need to start a YouTube channel. Or at least a Substack or something.
Yeah.
Because you said so many great things that I would love to I want more people to hear that, what you said. It's so well said, so necessary for a time like this. So anyway, thank you for hanging in.
I will do it. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on it. It's a privilege to conversate with you, and I really...
Absolutely.
Sorry, my mute went off. I really appreciate this space to be able to discuss these types of topics. So
Absolutely.
wonderful job, and thank you for bringing the nuanced perspective to a
For
more
sure.
needed space.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.